While most of the world still imagines the Nile as an eternal ribbon of life winding through Egypt's ancient wonders, Egypt itself is being transformed by a crisis that few outsiders truly grasp. As Ethiopia surges ahead with its massive dam project upstream, Egypt's very survival is being tested in ways that upend everything we thought we knew about this legendary river. Recent reports reveal the stakes have never been higher, and the fate of millions now hangs in the balance as the clock ticks. Before we dive into the heart of this unfolding crisis, I want to ask you for something important. If you care about seeing African stories told with depth and honesty, your support is essential. When you subscribe, like, or share, you're not just helping this channel grow, you're helping build a global community that values truth, context, and real dialogue. Every action you take helps us reach more people who care about Africa's future and the forces shaping it. Join us. Amplify these critical issues, and let's make sure the real story of the Nile is heard far beyond its banks. Let's start by stepping back in time to the banks of a river that has shaped civilizations for thousands of years. For over 5 millennia, Egypt's destiny has been written in the waters of the Nile. This river is not just a geographical feature or a poetic backdrop to history. It is Egypt's lifeblood, the force that turned desert into farmland and allowed one of humanity's greatest civilizations to flourish. Ancient Egyptians built their cities, temples, and tombs along its banks, and their survival depended on the annual floods that brought silt and fertility to the land. Even today, more than 95% of Egypt's population lives within a narrow ribbon of green that hugs the river and its delta. The rest of the country is arid, inhospitable desert. Without the Nile, Egypt as we know it simply would not exist. But this ancient dependence is now colliding with modern realities. Egypt's population has soared past 110 million, and the demands on the river have multiplied. Urbanization is accelerating, cities are swelling, and agriculture remains the backbone of the economy. Yet the water that once seemed limitless is now stretched to its breaking point. Recent data from the World Bank shows that Egypt is already classified as a water-scarce nation with less than 600 cubic meters of renewable fresh water per person per year, well below the international threshold for water scarcity. The Nile provides over 90% of Egypt's water, but that supply is under mounting threat. The Delta region, often called Egypt's breadbasket, is particularly vulnerable. Here, millions depend on irrigation for their livelihoods, and the land produces much of the country's food. But the delta is shrinking, battered by rising sea levels, soil salinization, and reduced river flow. As water becomes scarcer, the risk of a humanitarian crisis grows. Food insecurity, unemployment, and social unrest are no longer distant possibilities, they are looming realities. According to a 2023 report by the Food and Agriculture Organization, the Delta's agricultural output has already declined, and communities are feeling the strain as water rationing becomes more common. And all of this was true even before the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam entered the picture. Now, let's shift our focus upstream to the highlands of Ethiopia. Here, a different story is unfolding, a story of ambition, national pride, and the quest for development. Ethiopia, long one of Africa's most populous yet energy-poor nations, has set out to harness the Blue Nile for its own future. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD, is the largest hydroelectric project in Africa. When fully operational, it will generate more than 5,000 megawatts of electricity, enough to power millions of homes and fuel Ethiopia's industrial dreams. For Ethiopia, the GERD is more than an engineering marvel. It is a symbol of sovereignty and self-determination. The dam is being built with Ethiopian resources, financed through taxes and domestic loans, and constructed by Ethiopian hands. It promises to lift the country out of chronic power shortages, drive economic growth, and position Ethiopia as a regional energy exporter. In a region where development has too often been stymied by poverty and instability, the GERD represents hope and progress. According to the International Energy Agency, the project is already achieving its objective of boosting energy production, and Ethiopia is eager to leverage this new power for broader economic integration with its neighbors. But this progress comes at a cost, one that is being felt downstream in Egypt and Sudan. The dam's massive reservoir will hold more than 70 billion cubic meters of water, and the way it is filled and operated will directly affect the flow of the Nile. Ethiopia has moved quickly, filling the reservoir in stages without a binding agreement with its neighbors. Egypt sees this as a unilateral move that threatens its water security and violates decades of established practice. The tension is not just about water. It is about power, sovereignty, and the right to shape one's own destiny. Ethiopia argues that it has every right to use the Nile's waters for its development, just as Egypt has done for centuries. Egypt, on the other hand, insists that its very survival is at stake. The two positions seem irreconcilable, and the diplomatic standoff has dragged on for more than a decade. To understand how we arrived at this impasse, we need to look at the legal framework governing the Nile's waters. The most significant agreements date back to the colonial era, especially the 1959 Nile Waters Agreement between Egypt and Sudan. This treaty allocated the vast majority of the river's flow to these two countries, leaving Ethiopia and other upstream nations with little say. Ethiopia was not a party to these agreements and has long rejected their legitimacy. As a result, the GERD is not just a technical project, it is a challenge to the old order. Negotiations between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan have been lengthy and contentious. Talks have repeatedly broken down over key issues: how quickly the dam should be filled, how much water should be released during droughts, and what mechanisms should exist for dispute resolution. Egypt has pushed for a legally binding agreement that guarantees minimum flows, especially during dry years. Ethiopia has resisted, insisting on its right to manage the dam as it sees fit. International mediators have tried to bridge the gap. The United States, the African Union, and more recently, a coalition of countries including Brazil, China, India, and the UAE have all called for a more credible mediation process. But so far, no binding agreement has emerged. Observers note that the lack of trust and the competing national priorities have made compromise elusive. Each round of talks seems to end in frustration, with both sides accusing the other of intransigence. Sudan, caught between its two larger neighbors, has shifted its position multiple times. At first, Sudan opposed the GERD, fearing that it would disrupt its own water supply and threaten the safety of its dams. Later, Sudan saw potential benefits in the form of cheaper electricity and improved flood control, and its stance softened. But the ongoing conflict and instability within Sudan have weakened its ability to play a decisive role in negotiations. Today, Sudan is more a bystander than an active participant, its fate tied to decisions made elsewhere. According to recent analysis by the International Crisis Group, Sudan's instability has generated insecurity along Ethiopia's western frontier, further complicating regional dynamics and making the GERD dispute and the war in Sudan now interlinked crises. As diplomatic efforts stall, the risk of escalation grows. Egypt has made it clear that the Nile is a red line. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has warned that any reduction in Egypt's water share would be an existential threat. Military options have been openly discussed, and Egyptian officials have not ruled out the use of force to protect their interests. The rhetoric is stark, and the memories of past conflicts over water in the region add to the sense of danger. According to historical records, Egypt has repeatedly issued military threats in response to perceived threats to its Nile water supply, particularly regarding the GERD. The concept of a water war is not just theoretical, it has long been a part of Egyptian national security thinking. The consequences of conflict would be severe, not just for Egypt and Ethiopia, but for the entire region. The Nile is a transboundary river, and any disruption to its flow would ripple across borders. Trade could be disrupted, millions could be displaced, and the fragile economies of the Nile basin could be pushed into deeper crisis. Food insecurity, already a pressing issue, could become catastrophic. Political instability could spread, drawing in other regional powers and turning a local dispute into a wider conflagration. Reports from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute indicate that the potential for proxy conflicts is real, with regional actors watching closely and preparing to defend their interests if the situation deteriorates. Climate change is adding another layer of complexity. The flow of the Nile is becoming more erratic, with longer droughts and more intense floods. Egypt's dependence on the river makes it especially vulnerable to these changes. As water becomes scarcer, competition intensifies and the margin for error narrows. The stakes are not just about today's needs, but about the future of an entire region. According to a 2022 study published in Nature, climate change is altering the flow of the Nile River, leading to increased occurrences of both floods and droughts in Egypt and exacerbating the country's water insecurity. Yet, amid the tension and uncertainty, there are glimmers of hope. Technological innovation offers new tools for managing water scarcity. Egypt is investing in desalination plants, using advanced membrane technology to turn seawater into fresh water. The country is also exploring rainwater harvesting, wastewater treatment, and more efficient irrigation methods. These efforts are not a panacea, but they can help cushion the impact of reduced Nile flows. For example, Egypt's adoption of membrane technology for desalination is already making a difference in coastal areas, and new pilot projects in rainwater harvesting are being tested in the Delta. Regional cooperation is another potential path forward. The Nile Basin Initiative and the Nile Equatorial Lakes Subsidiary Action Program are examples of cross-border efforts to manage shared water resources. These initiatives promote joint action on water security, food security, and energy security. They encourage countries to see the Nile not as a zero-sum game, but as a shared resource that can benefit all. However, cooperation requires trust, and trust is in short supply. The legacy of colonial-era treaties, the scars of past conflicts, and the pressures of rapid population growth all make compromise difficult. Each country faces its own domestic challenges, and leaders are under intense pressure to deliver for their people. In this environment, even small steps toward cooperation are hard-won. Observers indicate that a legally binding agreement on the GERD remains the best hope for avoiding conflict. Such an agreement would set clear rules for filling and operating the dam, establish mechanisms for dispute resolution, and provide guarantees for downstream countries during droughts. It would also open the door to broader cooperation on issues like energy sharing, trade, and regional development. The stakes could not be higher. For Egypt, the Nile is a matter of life and death. For Ethiopia, the GERD is a symbol of national renewal. For Sudan, the outcome will shape its own future. And for the wider region, the way this dispute is resolved will set a precedent for how Africa manages its most precious resources in an era of scarcity and change. Let's take a closer look at the human dimension of this crisis. In Egypt's delta, farmers are already feeling the pinch. Fields that once yielded abundant crops are now parched and less productive. Water rationing is becoming more common, and some communities are forced to rely on less reliable sources. The threat of food shortages is real, and the social fabric is under strain. Urban areas are not immune. Cairo, a city of more than 20 million people, faces chronic water shortages. Infrastructure is aging, and leaks and inefficiencies waste precious supplies. As the population grows, the challenge of providing clean water to everyone becomes more daunting. The risk of unrest is ever present as people compete for dwindling resources. The economic impact is profound. Agriculture employs a significant portion of Egypt's workforce, and any reduction in water supply threatens jobs and livelihoods. Unemployment is already high, especially among young people. Food imports are rising, putting pressure on foreign exchange reserves. The government faces tough choices: how to balance the needs of farmers, urban residents, and industry in the context of scarcity. The Djed has become a lightning rod for these anxieties. Many Egyptians see the dam as an existential threat, a symbol of vulnerability in a rapidly changing world. The government has responded with a mix of diplomacy, public messaging, and, at times, saber-rattling. But the underlying issues run deeper than any single project. They reflect the broader challenge of managing shared resources in a region where water is life. Ethiopia, for its part, faces its own pressures. The Gerd is a source of national pride, but it is also a political gamble. The government has staked its legitimacy on the dam's success, promising that it will bring electricity, jobs, and prosperity. But the project has also generated controversy, both at home and abroad. Some Ethiopians worry about the environmental impact, the displacement of communities, and the risk of confrontation with neighbors. The international community has a role to play, but its influence is limited. Mediation efforts have so far failed to produce a breakthrough. The United States, the African Union, and other actors have all tried to broker a deal, but the fundamental issues remain unresolved. The call for a new quartet of mediators reflects the frustration with the current process and the desire for a more credible and effective approach. According to recent diplomatic sources, Brazil, China, India, and the UAE have called for a more credible international mediation process to replace South Africa as the lead mediator in negotiations. To deepen our understanding, let's look at a case study of regional water management that offers both caution and inspiration. The Senegal River Basin, shared by Senegal, Mali, Mauritania, and Guinea, faced its own water allocation crisis in the 1970s and 1980s. Severe droughts and competing national interests threatened to destabilize the region. However, the creation of the organization pour la mise en valeur du fleuve, Sénégal, OMVZ, established a framework for joint management, infrastructure sharing, and equitable benefit distribution. While not without its flaws, this model has helped the region avoid major conflict and provides a template for what might be possible on the Nile if political will can be found. The broader lesson is clear. Water disputes are not just technical problems. They are deeply political, shaped by history, identity, and the struggle for power. The Nile crisis is a microcosm of the challenges facing many regions in the 21st century as climate change, population growth, and resource scarcity collide. According to a 2021 Chatham House report, transboundary water disputes are expected to increase globally, with the Nile Basin often cited as a key test case for Africa's ability to manage shared resources peacefully. So, what would it take to move from confrontation to cooperation? The answer lies in a mix of innovation, diplomacy, and shared vision. Technological solutions can help stretch limited supplies, but they must be matched by political will. Countries must be willing to compromise, to see beyond short-term interests and to invest in regional stability. A legally binding agreement on the JERD would be a crucial first step. Such an agreement would not solve all the problems, but it would create a framework for managing the river in a way that is fair and predictable. It would reduce the risk of conflict and build confidence among the parties. It would also send the signal to other regions facing similar challenges that cooperation is possible, even in the most difficult circumstances. Beyond water, there are opportunities for broader economic integration. The Nile Basin is rich in potential, from agriculture to energy to trade. Shared infrastructure projects, cross-border investment, and coordinated development strategies could create new sources of growth and stability. But this requires a shift in mindset, from competition to collaboration, from zero-sum thinking to shared prosperity. Let's explore some underreported regional ripple effects. While Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan dominate headlines, the Nile's fate also affects neighboring countries like South Sudan, Uganda, and Kenya. These nations depend on the river's upstream tributaries for their own water needs and development plans. For example, Uganda's hydropower projects and Kenya's irrigation schemes are directly influenced by changes in the Nile's flow. Any disruption or instability in the basin can set off a chain reaction, undermining food security and economic growth across East Africa. Reports from the Nile Basin Initiative highlight that regional cooperation is not just a diplomatic ideal, but a practical necessity for millions living along the river's course. The risk of proxy conflicts is another dimension often overlooked. As the JERD dispute intensifies, regional powers such as the Gulf states and Turkey have shown increased interest in the Horn of Africa, investing in infrastructure and forging new alliances. These external actors could tip the balance, either fueling competition or supporting mediation efforts. The involvement of international financiers and development agencies also shapes the options available to Nile Basin countries, influencing everything from dam construction to agricultural policy. Let's clarify some of the complex concepts at play. The idea of water security is not just about having enough water, it's about having reliable, predictable access to water for people, agriculture, and industry. In Egypt's case, water security is inseparable from national security. The country's legal claim to the Nile is rooted in treaties that date back to colonial times, but these agreements are increasingly challenged by upstream nations seeking a fairer share. The technical debate over how quickly the GERD reservoir should be filled is, at its core, a debate over risk. How much risk should Egypt bear in the event of drought? And how much flexibility should Ethiopia have to pursue its development goals? To make this more tangible, consider the analogy of a shared bank account. For decades, Egypt and Sudan have been the primary account holders, drawing on the Nile's flow according to established rules. Now, Ethiopia wants to make its own withdrawals to invest in its future. But without clear agreements, every withdrawal by one party feels like a threat to the others. The challenge is to create a system where all parties can benefit without triggering a crisis of trust. Let's look at some potential future scenarios. In the best-case scenario, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan reach a binding agreement that balances their needs and creates mechanisms for managing droughts and disputes. This agreement unlocks new opportunities for regional cooperation, from energy sharing to joint agricultural projects. The Nile Basin becomes a model for transboundary water management, attracting investment and fostering stability. In the worst-case scenario, negotiations collapse and unilateral actions escalate. Egypt faces severe water shortages, leading to food crises and social unrest. Ethiopia presses ahead with its development plans, but regional tensions spiral out of control. Proxy conflicts erupt, and the Nile Basin becomes a flashpoint for wider instability, drawing in external powers and threatening the livelihoods of millions. The reality will likely fall somewhere between these extremes. But the choices made in the coming years will determine whether the Nile remains a source of life and unity or becomes a symbol of division and scarcity. Let's return to the present and consider the steps being taken on the ground. Egypt is investing heavily in water-saving technologies, from drip irrigation to wastewater recycling. Pilot projects in the Delta are demonstrating the potential of these innovations, but scaling them up will require significant resources and political will. International partners are providing technical assistance, but the pace of change is slow compared to the scale of the challenge. Ethiopia, meanwhile, is focused on maximizing the benefits of the GRD. The dam is already generating electricity, and plans are underway to expand transmission lines and connect with neighboring countries. This could transform Ethiopia into a regional energy hub, boosting economic growth and creating new opportunities for trade and investment. But the benefits will be uneven unless the underlying disputes over water sharing are resolved. Sudan's future remains uncertain. The country's internal conflicts have weakened its bargaining position, but its location between Egypt and Ethiopia makes it a key player in any long-term solution. Sudan stands to gain from improved flood control and cheaper electricity, but it also faces risks if water flows become unpredictable or if regional tensions escalate. The role of international actors cannot be overstated. The African Union has tried to mediate, but its efforts have been hampered by competing interests and limited leverage. The recent push for a new quartet of mediators reflects the need for fresh approaches and greater credibility. According to diplomatic sources, the involvement of Brazil, China, India, and the UAE could bring new perspectives and resources to the table, but success will depend on the willingness of the parties to compromise. Let's not forget the broader continental impact. The way the Nile crisis is resolved will shape not only the future of Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, but also the trajectory of African development. It will test the ability of African nations to manage their own affairs, to resolve disputes peacefully, and to chart a path toward sustainable growth. The lessons learned here will resonate across the continent, from the Congo Basin to the Limpopo, wherever water scarcity and resource competition threaten stability. To bring this all together, let's synthesize what's at stake. The Nile is more than a river. It is a test of Africa's capacity for cooperation, innovation, and resilience in the face of mounting pressures. The choices made by Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan will set a precedent for how the continent navigates the challenges of the 21st century, from climate change to population growth to the struggle for equitable development. The GERD crisis is not just about water or electricity. It is about the future of governance, the power of diplomacy, and the possibility of shared prosperity in a world where resources are finite and the need for collaboration has never been greater. As we look ahead, the choices are stark. On one path lies confrontation, instability, and decline. On the other lies cooperation, innovation, and shared progress. The difference will be made not just by leaders in Cairo, Addis Ababa, and Khartoum, but by the willingness of societies to demand a different future. Let's not underestimate the challenges. The legacy of mistrust runs deep, and the pressures of scarcity are real. But history shows that even the most intractable disputes can be resolved when the stakes are high enough and the alternatives are unacceptable. The Nile has always been a source of life and conflict, of hope and fear. Today, it stands at a crossroads. The decisions made in the coming years will determine whether it remains a symbol of unity and abundance or becomes a flashpoint for division and scarcity. As we close, I want to bring the focus back to you, The story of the Nile is not just about governments and treaties. It is about people, communities, and the choices we all make. What happens here will echo far beyond the banks of the river, shaping the future of Africa and the world. So, what do you think? Is diplomacy enough to avert a new Nile conflict, or are we heading toward a future defined by scarcity and confrontation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this vital conversation going. Your perspective matters, and together we can help shape a more informed and hopeful future for Africa and beyond.